In 1999, a video game appeared by a yet unknown creator who would go on to create some pretty weird and awesome string of strange video games. Koichi Suda's The Silver Case. The Silver Case was not Suda's first project, nor is it the one he is now most remembered for. But The Silver Case, I think, easily takes first place among games with weird storylines that you can barely understand even if you played it several times. Playing The Silver Case is such a strange experience, not only because its controls seem a bit outdated by now, and because at times it has a very clunky feel to it. No, the strange thing about The Silver Case is that in roughly 20 hours playtime you get absolutely invested with brilliantly crafted characters and a story that seems now more relevant than it seemed then. The most apt comparison would probably be to compare it to Metal Gear Solid 2, which broke totally new ground and which too seemed to predict several technological advances and political happenings we came to witness since its release. Now with The Silver Case, it is not that simple to see its relevance, partly because of its strange setting, but we will get to that in due time. The Silver Case can best be characterized as a visual novel, so there will be a lot of reading going on, and the gameplay itself is actually quite minimal. Often it restricts itself to you moving around and at times solving puzzles with varying difficulty. Similar to other visual novels like Ace Attorney or Danganronpa, The Silver Case's strength lies not in its gameplay and its mechanics. Because it is so clunky, I would almost argue that The Silver Case can be a very rewarding experience if you don't pay too much attention to the gameplay itself, even though some of the puzzles can be quite fun to solve. But there's definitely less going on than, for example, in Resident Evil or Silent Hill, which also rely on puzzles, but where the combat factor sort of balances a lack of great mechanics in other aspects of the game. With The Silver Case, this is not the case. That said, why am I making this video and why do I absolutely 100% believe that you should play it if you haven't done so already? To answer this question, let's have a look at what The Silver Case is actually about. As already mentioned, the story of The Silver Case is quite obscure. First, the setting. The Silver Case takes place in the so-called 24th Ward, which is a shut-off area where people with a huge income disparity live and where crime is treated like a disease. In the 24th Ward, the common idea that holds the society together is that crimes can spread, that criminality is something like a drug, that it has to be stopped from spreading. It is stated that not the income disparity, but access to information is a source of conflict in the 24th Ward, which is inhabited by 100,000 people. In the prologue to the game, which is called Case 0, Lunatics, an example is shown of a criminal who then has to be chased down by a crime-fighting group called Republic. It is here where we first meet our main character called Akira, but who can nonetheless be named by the player. Akira is a silent protagonist, becoming mute after being traumatized by the deaths of several members of his anti-crime group. The whole prologue also introduces Tetsugoro Kusabi, who will play a prominent role in the game, and other detectives from Republic, and, which will become more important later, the so-called Heinous Crimes Unit, of which Kusabi is a member. The prologue ends with the criminal's last words, which announce that Kamui Uehara will return and that they, the criminals, will be reborn as Kamui reincarnations. This is expanded upon in the first proper chapter of the game, called Case 1, Decoy Man. Here, Kamui is revealed to have escaped a psychiatric hospital, having apparently killed his nurse and then two other women he has been in contact with in the past. Chasing Kamui becomes the primary goal in this chapter. In the process of this, we get to know the Heinous crimes unit more closely. Because after mishaps in the prologue, the Republic crime fighting group lost 2 members, with Chief Daigo Natsume ending up unconscious in a hospital. So Akira, the player, joins the HCU temporarily and then from chapter 2 onwards permanently. The Heinous Crimes Unit consists of Tetsugoro Kusabi, who is 44 years old, a heavy smoker and quite cynical, but who has a good heart. Chitsuru Hachizuka, who is 25 years old and the only female member of the HCU, who solves crimes in an analytical and one could say statistical manner, an approach which leads to frequent clashes with her colleagues. Then there is Kiyoshi Morikawa, 38 years old, a very laid-back detective, but who can lash out if needed and is apparently very successful in solving crimes. There's Sumio Kodai, 26 years old, who has bad hearing, which will be important later on. And finally the chief of the HCU, Shinji Kotobuki, who is 51 years old and is an iron leader who doesn't get involved directly in investigating cases, but works more as a coordinator for the team. Oh, and also there's Naketagawa Morichika, but we really don't want to talk about him. Now, as chapter 1 progresses, depending if one counts the prologue as a chapter, which from now on I will not do, it turns out that it was not Kamui who committed the murders, but a female companion of his named Ayame Shimohira. It also turns out that Kamui was raised in so-called shelters, where different kinds of shelter kids, apparently orphans, are being raised. Kamui is found hiding at Ayame's place by Sumio and both are arrested. This is practically the last thing we hear from Kamui himself until the last chapter in the whole game, but he continues to play a central role in the mystery that is the Silver Case's plot. The whole thing about the shelter kids will also play a larger role in later chapters, so we will not talk about this a lot now. I will likewise skip over chapter 2, which is called Case 2 Spectrum, which is a great and tragic story about 2 children and their involvement in the death of one of their neighbors, but has no real connection to the overarching plot of the Silver Case. It is here that Akira first gets some experience with solving a case, and he is also tested about his knowledge at the end of the chapter. It is very different with case 3, Parade, a kidnapping case that is being investigated by Kusabi, Akira, the player, and Sumio. The stakeout at the mansion that will eventually be the center stage of the kidnapping was already shown in the last chapter, but it is here that the Yukimura mansion explodes when Akira tries to get a closer look at it. Chairman Yukimura, an important businessman involved in development of cities in the 24th Ward via the Yukimura Zaibatsu company, is being kidnapped. Because the Heinous crime unit needs support, another anti-crime group supports them, the Central Police Department. But as expected, Kusabi doesn't get along with them very well. After receiving several videos showing the unconscious chairman and getting information that the chairman will be killed unless 600 billion yen will be delivered to the kidnappers, it falls to Akira to deliver a diamond worth as much to a trash disposal facility, which he does. One of the kidnappers, of which there seem to be 3, is then seen jumping into the high-temperature oven together with the diamond. The chairman is released, but his assets and his reputation are both ruined. At a meeting he holds with his co-workers, who all would have preferred him not to return, he blows the Zaibatsu company, including workers and himself, up. After this shocking ending, Akira and Tetsu take a stroll through the archives of the Zaibatsu company, where they discover the true meaning of the kidnapping. It turns out that there was a little artificial village called Mikio 77, where residents lived in close proximity to the Saibatsu company, where they set up their industry. After a while, the residents noticed that Saibatsu's activities were polluting the rivers and waterworks of the village. They staged several protests, hence the title of the chapter, Parade, which signifies a public protest against this, but were also affected by the dumped chemicals in the water supply. The protests became increasingly violent, and this led to the rape and death of a young girl called Riru, offered as a sacrifice by her own parents, led on by the villagers believing her to be a witch. Riru had 3 friends, which turn out to be the 3 kidnappers: Hiseki, who kills himself when he is captured in the course of Parade; Fuyuki, who kills himself, as already mentioned, by jumping into the smokestack with a diamond; and finally, and this comes as quite a shock, Sumio himself. As the 3 kidnappers were friends with Riru, they were punished likewise, with Sumio having his eardrums pierced, becoming deaf in the process. He learned several abilities to hide this disability and bribed the officer conducting hearing tests at the Heinous crime unit, also managing telephone calls by a machine which instantly translates audio data into braille. Sumio was the mastermind behind the kidnapping, which it turns out was a ploy for revenge against what the Saibatsu company did to Mikio 77 and Riru. After all this is revealed to Kusabi and Akira, the final stage of the revenge plan is set in motion, and Sumio lets the remnants of Mikio 77, now an abandoned village, explode. Confronted by Kusabi as to why he went so far, he gives just one reason: to kill the past. In Chapter 3, Case 3, Parade, we witness the depths crime can come to and how even close friends can be involved in these schemes. Kusabi is later seen visiting Sumio in jail after he's been captured and subsequently fired from his position several times. Chapter 4, Kamui Drome, deals more closely with Kamui himself. It is a chapter largely devoted to internet crime and seems eerily prescient. It deals with illegal surveillance of persons, kidnappings via net contacts, cyberbullying, but also the faint possibility of digital love, as Daft Punk would call it. It becomes clear in this chapter that there is a new following of Kamui building, who are waiting for Kamui to return to bring a new golden age into the world. But until this point, the player has not really a grasp on who or what Kamui actually is. All this gets cleared up in the most confusing way possible in the 5th chapter, Live Cut. Now this chapter can be a bit overwhelming, and having played it 3 times now, there are still some open questions and mysteries. But that is the nature of the silver case. So let's try to make sense of it all. There are several versions of the stories regarding Kamui. It is quite difficult to judge which one is correct, but here it goes. Kamui, and I must add, Kamui in his original form, 20 years before the game starts, which by the way plays in 1999, assassinates several important people of the 24th Ward, in total 7. This is the actual silver case, which is alluded to in the title, because the assassinated targets were the most senior of the leaders of the wards, hence silver case. Get it? I will spare you me listening and mispronouncing all the Japanese names. Kamui in this way became a sort of crime god, but now we also learn that there were 3 factions, the allied TRO, CCO, and the faction opposing these two, the FSO. Apparently, the FSO used Kamui as an assassin to weaken the power of the allied factions. But that is not all.
とか思っちゃうし、なんかよくわかんないですね。
いやー、殺人はやっぱやばいと思いますけど、目的なんかあるんですよね。その目的のために行動するという部分に関しては、ちょっとは尊敬できると思うんですけど、自分がいつも目的を持たずにダラダラしてるんで余計そう思います。
被害者は文部省最高顧問、臨時国際連盟総裁など国家重要人物7名。政治に絡んだテロリズムとも考えられる事件に一体どんな目的があるのだろうか。殺害現場には今でも花束が添えられ、悲痛さを一層醸し出している。関係者はこの事件をどう見ているのか。我々は殺害された被害者をよく知る高官のインタビューに成功した。
何様っぽいか知らないけど、被害者の中には知ってる者も大勢います。頭にしてるんです。噂される真相というのはほとんどがでっち上げだ。あんたらも含めて何をでっち上げするか知らんが、あんな殺人鬼を救世者と見ると自体が犯罪だ。
この犯罪史上稀に見る連続殺人は本当にたった一人の手で行われたのだろうか。犯人上原カムイはどんな人物なのか。深まるばかりの謎。その糸口を得るため、実際にカムイ本人と接触した人物から重要な話を聞くことができた。
あったっていうか、会ってしまったという方が正しいですね。カムイという人物に興味を持てるようにはなりましたね。惹かれたということではなく、あくまで対象としてですけど、理想ですか。彼は理想のレベルを我々には到底届かないところにあえて設定したのかな。それを超えられた真の理想は養えないってカムイは考えているのかもしれないですね。でもそれはモラルとしては理解されないでしょう。人を殺すことがお前の理想なのか、ファシストかって。いい意味でも悪い意味でもそう思いますよ。彼の行動はいろんな人に注目されているし、それに少なくとも人にはできないことをやっているわけだから、そこに共感を覚える人は多いわけですよ。それを希望という人も。
As I already mentioned, we find out that Kamui and his female counterpart Ayame were born in the shelters of the 24th Ward. We enter these shelters in the 5th chapter and see that the TRO, CCO, has been using the shelter kids to achieve a process called silver ocularization, which grants people immortality. The shelter kids, which were kept in the shelters around 4 years, are monitored and controlled in every aspect of their life, have to solve difficult and demeaning tasks like sitting in the dark for hours without making a sound, solving several cognitive puzzles, and so on. If they do not comply with these orders given, they are killed or processed, as is the term used for this in the silver case. Kamui is one of the shelter kids, but we learn after Kamui escapes and kills again in the 5th chapter, as was alluded to in the video I've just shown, and is then cornered and killed by snipers of the HCU, that there is not just one Kamui. Kamui is just a name given to whoever is applying the element of crime. The shelter kits in total can be viewed as a sort of stock for Kamui, and so it gets clear that also the FSO has been using the shelter kits for their own gain. We also learn, and this is perhaps the biggest spoiler in the game, that several people, including the player itself, have been shelter kits and hence copies of Kamui or Ayame in the case of the female characters like Hachisuka. Akira is destined to be the next incarnation of Kamui. Together with Tetsu, who kills the chief of the HCU, and Morikawa for confusing reasons, Akira is given the choice of ending the never-ending cycle of Kamui rebirths or really be incarnated as the next version of Kamui. What he chooses remains unclear even in the post-game chapter, as apparently another Kamui version has killed the mayor of the 24th ward, but is not Akira, the player itself. This all sounds very confusing, but this is the essence of the Silver Case. What makes it so great is its ability to portray great characters, which also develop in so little time in this short game. Tetsu Kusabi for sure is one of the best video game characters ever created, and so is Kamui Uehara, even Akira, the player itself. For Akira, even though he never speaks a word, similar to Gordon Freeman in Half-Life, he still has a strong characterization through his actions in the game. We see for example glimpses of his investigative skills. Kusabi meanwhile is a typical noir cop, but who gets progressively more complex with the advance of the chapters. What I left out is the whole second half of the game, which portrays the same timeline but with a different protagonist, Tokyo Morishima, a journalist. This second half is great too, even brilliant, but I leave it out here to not repeat things and because the game seems already confusing enough. What makes the Silver Case very compelling too is the portrayal of its themes. We see a society in which the members know that they are being controlled, that in a way they are nothing more than lab rats to the government and to those in power. The only tool remaining for breaking out of this cycle is to turn to crime, to which the government reacts very harshly, as we see at several points in the game that processing criminals is often encouraged. The 24th Ward portray a Japanese dystopia, in which people live officially just like they should. But especially in Kamui Drome, the 4th chapter, we see what is bubbling under the surface. And this is exactly how it is in modern times. Confronted by several global problems and potential catastrophes, the people don't turn towards politics on which they feel they don't have much influence whatsoever, just like in the Silver Case. Instead, people turn to past mysteries, like the JFK assassination or the conspiracies in general, to find some sort of meaning in modernity. The fact that just now an assassin is being hailed as a sort of bringer of justice exactly mirrors the plot of the Silver Case, where in one video sequence that I've shown, it is shown that people think that Kamui Uehara is a sort of hero who will help people to find a way out of their miserable lives. This is one-to-one what we saw last week with the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson by Luigi Mangione. People are so embroiled in their own frustrations that they condone, even encourage killing when it is a killing directed towards those in power. I started this video before the murder happened on the 4th December of 2024, but I wrote that Silver Case has been prescient in its portrayal of a sterile society which from time to time give way to their frustrations by implosions of emotions. Crime in this way is indeed like a virus. It spreads as an idea, the idea that crime is a justified way to rebel, to protest. But the Silver Case shows this line of thinking to be false, because crime only creates more misery and more suffering, and Tetsu Kusabi, in his pragmatic and detached way of viewing life, is correct when he labels Kamui Uehara as just a normal criminal. All the ideas attached to Kamui are attached to him by the society, which want to embrace a sort of prophet. But Kamui is a false prophet, as stated in the Dylan song, and it remains to be seen how long it will take until especially the leftist portion of society will realize that Mangione likewise is just a false prophet who will bring no relief to the pain of the wicked.